Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Wheel Show. I am your host, Dr. Wheel, and we will be talking all things blended learning today with Kimberly Wright. So, for those who are watching the show and may not have met Kimberly in person in a number of conferences or on Twitter, Kimberly, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kimberly Wright. I live here in El Paso, Texas. Hi, today is 101. I am a TLI teacher leader for the El Paso Independent School District. I'm going to start this year at Cooley Elementary, which is an underprivileged school here in our city. I taught for the El Paso Independent School District for 7 years. I only taught fourth grade, so most of my experience is really based in the elementary classroom. And there I implemented technology throughout, my time in the elementary classroom. So that's basically who I am.
Awesome, awesome. Now, if she may look a little familiar, she is the sister of Karen Balbier, who you have seen on the show twice previously. All right. So let's get into it. What is blended learning and how does it change the learning environment in the classroom?
So, blended learning is kind of a cross between, the brick and mortar school that we all know, that we all grew up in, that we all learned in, basically. And in place, we also add some instruction that's online. So, I think the benefit for students in that type of environment, and, any of us who have taught, there was always a student in our classroom where we wish we had more time or we wish we could give further instruction. There was always, that aspect of time, or that child might be 1 year, 2 years behind. So I think the benefit, of online learning or the blended classroom is that it gives the student flexibility of place, time, pace. I'm sorry, there's a blower going in the background. And, it gives the student, well, it takes the learning away from being teacher-centered to being student-centered and directed. So, instead of lectures and textbooks all the time, we're looking at a technology-enriched environment where, there's some kind of virtual aspect in learning. And, in a way, students get to dictate their learning. And I think it kind of also gives teachers some intimate times where they can interact with the student instead of just constantly being in front of the classroom. And so gives us some interaction, as though I think some people would think that blended learning would take away from that interaction. I think it would actually increase, you know?
Mhm.
So.
Okay. So, how should a teacher approach the design and delivery of blended learning?
Well, so I think since I mainly work with elementary, I think even in my own classroom, one of the types of blended learning that I enjoyed was rotation. And anybody who, was in an elementary classroom, you're familiar with centers. And I think the other reason rotation is comfortable for a elementary school teacher would be if you have a teacher who's maybe hesitant or whatnot, they know what centers is. So maybe what you can do is implement one aspect of blended learning into your center. So it's not so alien, it's not so foreign. You just implement slowly, adding one center at a time. So I think that the reason rotation is good within the elementary classroom is that it gives the student a variety of ways to learn, right? So we're not just teaching the student in one way. We can have some traditional and some non-traditional ways to learn. And you can have individualized learning in one center along with small group instruction, or you might even have one-on-one instruction while the other students are learning in different ways. I think so away from that, I don't really have too much experience outside of elementary, but many of my friends at universities or at the high school level, they really enjoy the flipped classroom concept where, and even my own children, I have a student in high school and her teacher often does, flipped classroom experiments, I guess you could say, where, she'll have the lecture at home and then she'll go in and do the assignment in class. For me as a parent, looking at that aspect, I absolutely love it because I have no idea what happened in the course of the day, right? I don't know what happened. What did the teacher teach? How did they teach you? Instead, the student is watching the video at home, and the student can stop, rewind, watch it 85 times if they don't get it, instead of, stopping the teacher in the middle of the lecture. So I think in the high school and college classroom where you have hundreds of students, or, I think that type of blended learning seems to work well.
Okay, so and I'm glad you actually brought up the rotation, which is something that in explaining, I guess, the workflow of blended learning to the teachers I'll be working with as our one-to-one expands to the high school. That's how I explain it to teachers. Whereas
Right.
you have 25 students in your class, you can actually put, 15 in Schoology and deliver
Right.
direct instruction to a very much smaller group of 10. Or you could say, okay, you 7 in Schoology, you 8 in Compass, and I still work with a smaller group to deliver that one-to-one with that direct instruction with smaller group. And so and that's how I tried to explain to them so they could sort of mentally visualize how their classroom would work as opposed to what they've been doing these past, 5, 10, 15 years. So that bringing that up was a great introduction, and that was really awesome. So we use an LMS, and I understand that with blended learning, you don't have to use an LMS
Right.
because there are other various other online programs that you could use. But in thinking about using an LMS, how important to an LMS is it to blended learning, and do you actually have a favorite LMS?
Well, when I was in my classroom, a few years ago, I enjoyed Edmodo, and the reason I enjoyed Edmodo is it's so user friendly, and I think that you can post videos, assignments online, and the students have the ability to go back when they get home. You can differentiate instruction. You can give different lessons to different students. You might have a student, like in my 4th grade classroom, I had students who were on the 8th grade, 9th grade reading level, and then I have some who are in 2nd, 4th grade reading level. It's an opportunity to differentiate, give them different, different topics, different assignments. I know Schoology, like you said, is also fabulous now. So for me, I think it's important. I mean, organization and structure and a place for students to go back, because let's just be honest, they do not hear everything we're saying. Their brains are thinking about 85 different things at once. So it's always good for them to be able to go back and go, oh, that's what Miss Wright was talking about, or that's what Dr. Will was talking about. Even for teachers, when you're teaching a seminar, or there's always a nice place to go back and reference, right? So, and also, like my own daughter, she'll send her teacher messages after school. I didn't understand this. And, you'll get a direct message back. So it's kind of that constant, if you want it, communication with your students, so, or even your faculty, if you'd like. I think it's vital.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of the fears or objections you have heard teachers who are new to blended learning, and what was either your own personal process with getting comfortable with blended learning, or how have you assisted teachers in getting comfortable with blended learning?
Well, I think that, one of the things that you start talking about when people hear blended learning and you talk about students having instruction online, all of a sudden, you'd hear some teachers whispering, oh, they want to replace us with computers. That was one of the fears I'd hear over and over again. I'm like, we are not replaceable. We cannot be replaced. And I know that I would hear, especially, honestly, a lot of the teachers that I would teach with, who, they're not as comfortable with the technology. So that was always their biggest fear. But the bottom line is, educators will never, ever be replaced. We will not be replaced. Even if we have all these great technologies, we cannot be replaced. So I think that was our biggest fear. And then implementation. But again, if you give teachers other elements that they're already comfortable with and slowly implement and slowly structure them towards being comfortable, I think that helps. For me, implementing blended learning was easy just because I realized that it kept my students engaged 100% of the time. I kept everybody engaged. Nobody was bored. for the most part, students are learning on their level, and you're changing the instruction. It's not the same thing every day. Kids are excited to come to school, and you realize those students who, so we have our students who are very, very low and very, very high, and those typically tend to be our behavior problems because they're bored, they are learning's too easy or learning's too difficult, and you engage both of those students when you blend learning, I think. Okay, so for me, it was a given. I had to do it. I had to learn more. I had to gain that passion, learn more, think of other things that I could do with my kids to engage them, because otherwise my classroom management was way it was too much for me to handle. And actually, classroom management was no longer an issue once I blended the learning, and the students were learning on different levels. Classroom management is no longer an issue. Even your students with learning disabilities, with a variety of issues. My first year teaching was all kinds of fun. But anyway, so I think that when you blend learning, it kind of takes away your behavior problems. One of the other fear teachers have, I think the biggest thing when introducing, or the element that you have to discuss with teachers is, the students will always be able to navigate technology better than you. I have a 13-year-old and I have a 16-year-old. And if I need to figure something out, I'm going to tell you, my first person I go to is my 16-year-old. And she will, I'm like, oh, I can't understand how to open this document, or I don't know what went happen. I think my computer's about to blow up. What do you think I should do? She will be the first one to navigate me through my computer. And unfortunately, I have to be comfortable with that. And these are the students that we're teaching. There is no way we can keep up with them. These kids are on their devices 24/7. We have to cook dinner. We have to clean. We have jobs. There's no way we can possibly keep up with these kids. And it's going to get better and better. So unfortunately, you almost have to admit to your students, and in a very respectful way, you know what? I understand. I'm not going to be able to, and students will challenge you, especially in middle school and high school level, and they'll almost take it as, oh, I'm better than you because I can navigate. No, look, I understand that you can navigate the technology, but this is a partnership and let's learn together. And students love more than, you want to build a bond with your student, have them teach you how to do something. Then they'll think, it's just the greatest experience. I don't know, but I think that's the biggest fear. And teachers have a really hard time sometimes admitting that they're not the expert. And unfortunately, we're just not going to be the expert in this environment. So I think that's kind of the best way to approach it, is kind of explain to teachers, you're not going to be the expert in this, but there's a little bit of hand holding in both ends for the learning. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and that's a nice segue to this question. How does blended learning affect the relationship between teacher and student?
Like I said, I think I said a little bit earlier, I think it gives you an opportunity to work. I remember in my own classroom, and I always go back to my own classroom, and I tell stories to teachers too. You always have those kids where you're like, oh, you can see it in their eyes, they didn't quite get it, or maybe you could have given them a little bit more. I think blended learning gives you an opportunity to allow children to collaborate with each other, or even have opportunity where they work alone and excel by themselves. And you kind of, give them options for learning. But at the same time, the interaction that you have with that student, instead of, oh, where do I put my paper? Or just really silly classroom management questions, instead of having that type of interaction, or sometimes students will ask the same question over and over again, what ends up happening is students come up with real questions to ask you, because again, they're engaged and they're self-learning, so that interaction, that relationship is almost stronger, because when they do come to you, it's an actual question. I don't know if that makes sense. So, and then your partners in learning, it's not just you talking in the front of the classroom. There's engagement, there's dialogue going back and forth, there's learning together occurring.
Okay. So in the whole practice idea of blended learning, to me, the most dangerous aspect of it is the online learning piece, because not only does it require teachers to learn how to effectively design and deliver online courses, it requires them to change their mindset in facilitating a learning environment, as opposed to leading the learning the environment via lecture. And it also puts the onus on students. So
Right.
students are not like, okay, here's a sheet of paper, uh, circle some bubbles or draw lines or whatever. They now have to become self-directed learners, which a lot of students are not used to that type of learning and they're not used to taking that ownership for their learning. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the beauty of blended learning really is that learning gets to be self-directed. I think that that's what our country needs is self-directed learning. I think that our kids go from, you know, sometimes, instead of us providing these enriching activities where students actually have to think, students are supposed to just sit there and absorb. So, again, I'll go back to my own classroom, and I see it time again in classroom after classroom. In my own classroom, my students I taught science. That was my favorite subject. I taught other subjects too, but science was my favorite. One of the things I felt like I had to reteach every year was the ability to question and think. It was just, and this was in third grade, and I thought, what are we doing that our third graders have the inability to think and self-direct themselves they couldn't even see a problem and come up with their own questions. So I think that our testing environment that we have right now, we've totally stripped our students of the ability to think, to question, to really be a child. We're taking away their ability to think. So what's going to happen when they get into the work environment? They're not going to be able to be creative. They're not going to be able to think on their own. So I would venture to say it's dangerous if we don't head towards blended learning. We need to give students the opportunity to think. Are they going to drag their heels? Are they going to complain? Absolutely. Especially if you're trying to implement blended learning in an environment filled with hormones, like let's say middle school or high school. Are you going to get comments, or students going to fight you on it? Absolutely. But it'll only happen for a couple of months. Once they realize, when learning is occurring and curiosity is sparked, students are having so much fun that they don't realize they're learning, and that's what you want to create. You don't want them to just sit there and learn through osmosis. You want them to create. You want them to go beyond. And so will you face resistance at first? Yes, absolutely. They will hate you because they haven't had to think for years and years and years. So you're going to force them to not be lazy and think on their own. Oh my gosh, there you will absolutely. Especially in those hormone-filled, with those cranky teenagers. But in the end, you will have a great learning environment where they're creating and learning on their own. So that's, I don't know. I think that especially it's needed in our middle school and our high school environments. And I think that's going to be the most difficult place to implement. So
where do you see online learning headed in K through 12 education?
I think that it's coming. I think that, we have teachers who, I've heard teachers say, well, I'm just trying to buy time until I retire. Well, unfortunately, it's coming and it's here. Whether you're planning on retiring in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, all of us as educators, we all love kids. Every single one of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We're definitely not here for the paycheck. We're not here for the gratitude. And some days we're definitely not there for the respect. So why are we here? We're here for the kids. And, we know that we've been doing something. Why are we so behind all the other nations? We're doing something either wrong, or maybe we should just change things. I think that blended learning gives our children the opportunity, or us as educators, to reach every single child and not to leave a single child behind, to engage every single child that walks through a classroom. So I think that, it's coming. It's something that we need to do. And even if you're that educator who you're like, but I'm scared of computers, and I was scared. I came out of college. I was 20 something. I didn't know what I was doing either. My fourth grade students taught me more than I could ever learn in a university course. So, sit there and learn with your kids and ask questions just like you want them to ask questions. And your high school students, oh my gosh, they will get a thrill out of asking them questions and them being able to answer you. So I think that blended learning is here, and it's going to change just like everything changes, but I think it's what our country needs. I think that the way we're using classroom instruction right now, we're not utilizing it efficiently. And I think blended learning gives children an opportunity to learn at their own pace, learn at their own level, but yet increase interaction with teachers. And I think that it doesn't mean teachers are disappearing, doesn't mean that we're going away. It actually increases our effectiveness in the classroom. So that's what I think. Hopefully I didn't answer that too in a crazy whirlwind way, but
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, what are some of the positive outcomes you've witnessed in a blended learning classroom, and what are some of the drawbacks?
I think, some of the drawbacks, I'm going to talk about drawbacks first. I think that if it's not fully implemented with a positive attitude, with, starting from administration, coaches, leaders, all the way down to the teacher level, I think that it will be a total train wreck. So I think if done right with proper leadership and support, there are no drawbacks. But I think that if the teacher is dragging their feet, or administrators, or there's someone in the equation that isn't fully on board, then it'll be a disaster. It won't work. But I think if implemented correctly, where everyone supports every student, every teacher, every coach, every administrator, and I guess you could say it has to be from the district down, right? Then I think there are no drawbacks. But that's my personal opinion. The benefits I see is, think about our own children or every student. I think every teacher has that one student they feel like they could have reached or gone a little further with. Imagine if you had the tools and the capability to go back and reach that student. So, the one benefit I saw in my own classroom is kids that I never thought I could bring out of their shell, could collaborate, have conversations, were presenting online to other classrooms, were engaged in learning. I had students who were on medication who, and I've seen it in other classrooms too, students who just weren't engaged, who the teacher was like, well, last year they were on medication, but this year they're doing great, they're engaged. I don't know what that other teacher was talking about. So, you actually find out who your students are, what their learning styles are, and then how to reach them, So I think the benefits I've seen is that each student, regardless of how they learn, they're reached. So our typical students, you'll have, I think I would venture to say probably about 80% of our students can learn in a traditional environment. But what about the other 20%? So I think that the biggest benefit I've seen is that the opportunity to reach every single child in your classroom, not just the 80% who can sit there quietly and learn from you, but, and we can argue whether or not that's learning also, but, it's to actually teach and have the entire classroom learn and, have the teacher learn along with them. So that's what I think the greatest benefit is, or I guess the greatest testament, I think, to blended learning is, or those classrooms.
Awesome. So before we go, I always end my shows with final advice. For those schools, teachers, or districts who are apprehensive about blended learning, what is your advice for them in moving forward?
My advice would be to get on Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus. Even if you're at the district level, find other educators. Find other modes of learning. Find a PLN, professional learning network. Go to conferences and jump in. Just jump in and just do it. Stop fighting it. like I said earlier, it's coming, you know. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would give is find other educators, you know, get on Twitter, watch podcasts, you know, and connect with other educators around the globe and find out what they're doing in their classrooms to make blended learning work, because it's coming, you know. Jump in and learn with the rest of us, you know. That would be the advice I would give.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Kimberly, for being
You're welcome.
a guest on the show. And people, be on the lookout for a Monday. I'm doing a best of prepare yourself for ISTE podcast.
Very cool.
Thank you. I'm excited. This will be my second ISTE, but I know there will be people who will be going for the first time and sort of getting them prepared for the enormity of it, because it is a rock star environment with, you know, all these people. So, folks, as always, thank you for watching, and always be you, EDU. Until next time, peace.